السلام عليكم، مساء الخير جميعا. أرحب بالحضور الكريم باسم الجهات الثلاثة المنظمة لهذه الندوة، مؤسسة قطر للتربية والعلوم وتنمية المجتمع، GE Foundation و FHI 360. نرحب فيكم جميعا ونتمنى ندوة إن شاء الله تعالى طيبة وجلسات ومتحدثين إن شاء الله تعالى الجميع يستفيد منهم، ونقاش جيد بإذن الله تعالى نخرج فيه ببعض المقترحات وبعض التوصيات بإذن الله تعالى. اسمحوا لي أقدم المتحدث الرئيسي لنا الليلة وضيفنا سيد نبيل محمد البوعينين. نبيل محمد البوعينين هو المدير التنفيذي لمشروع الميناء الجديد الدوحة. نبيل البوعينين خريج جامعة لامار قسم هندسة ميكانيكية سنة 1994. كان يدرس في جامعة قطر في كلية الهندسة. نظرا لتميزه تم اختياره من قبل قطر للبترول للابتعاث في أحد الجامعات في أمريكا وانهى دراسته الهندسية هناك. طبعا بعد ما تخرج الأخ نبيل التحق بقطر للعمل بقطر للبترول واشتغل في مجموعة من المشاريع، منها أرب دي غاز ريسايكل، وايضا بروجكت اند كومن كولينج ووتر بروجكت، وغيرها من المشاريع اللي تطور فيها من مهندس متدرب او تحت التطوير الى رئيس مهندسين، وحتى وصل الى مشروع في عمر 32 سنه اللي هو اكبر مشروع من المشاريع الكبرى في قطر للبترول، وتوسعه ميناء راس لفان الذي تعدت ميزانيته اكثر من 14 بليون ريال قطري. طبعا حاليا الاخ نبيل سيد نبيل يشغل منصب المدير التنفيذي لمشروع الميناء الجديد، وهو واحد من اعظم المشاريع الاساسيه والتحتيه لدوله قطر، واللي متوقع تكلفته تزيد عن 25 بليون ريال قطري. فرحبوا معي بالاخ نبيل ويتفضل مشكور.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Good evening everybody, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to make sure that my slides and the presentation is shown. I would like to share with you my experience being the executive director for Newport project and how I achieved that position. I'm not going to talk about my project. I'm going to talk about the career that I've been through, which have made me as what I am now and where I reach as a project director for this major project. First one is, what is career planning? I will speak about things the way I see them and the way it affected me in my life, which made me. A structured exercise understanding to identify one's objectives, skills, strengths and weaknesses. It is the process of establishing career objective and determining appropriate educational and developmental program and to further develop the skills required to achieve short or long-term career objective. So you have to have an objective in your career which you have to seek and then obtain. Next one. What can you do? Assess yourself, know your talents and skill. You will be most effective in a career which uses your best and most available abilities. How? Look for them in your favorite achievement, no matter how small the achievements. What you need to do in reality is you have to know what you are good at. For me personally, I found myself good at in the mathematics. Then I liked the engineering, so I decided why not to be engineer. But that was done during my let's say secondary school. Then I start to talk to others, encouraged by my direct relatives, and that helped me to make my decision. Seek a job you feel passionate about. Yes. You need to seek a job that you feel passionate about. Don't just go with whatever others require. But at the same time, you have to match. I was thinking that I need to be an engineer, but the market needs more of mechanical engineering at that time. So I decided to be an engineer and a mechanical field. So people have to think what they want at the early stage, and then they have to decide what they want as well, what the market needs. So then you match it together to be what you have to be. of course, the market need is important, and you have to guide the students at early stage, whomever have, you know, in his house a son or daughter or friends. You have to guide them, really need to be guided. What they want, what the market need, you need to explain to them. We had the chance to have others to explain to us, so we need to explain to others as well. As I said, you must match your talent and job with the market needs. Other than that, you must find a mentor who will provide guidelines and motivations. Where you find them, you can find them in your business relation, professional association, internet, but you have to make sure that you are linked to the right organization or right people as well. And that happens if you do a proper studies and a proper search. So really, you have to look at it. You don't. Things will not gonna come to you. You have to go away and really look at your what could make you achieve your talent. You need to as well study, read, learn, and do everything you can about your job. How? Temporary, part-time, volunteering, and summer jobs. Do not feel entitled to a senior position just because you have a degree. Do the job by your own hand and build operational and practical experience. At that time, I'm gonna speak about rules and then what's affected me in my life. For that, for example, in my life, I was really, when I started the job after the university, I used to listen, not to speak a lot, because I have got 2 ears and 1 mouth. So I used to listen, really, because others, you have to listen, and you have to listen to ask, not to listen to argue. So really, I learned a lot from my superior at that time, in Qatar Petroleum, specific. So that helped me a lot to build up my knowledge. And when I listen to anything which could have any question, I don't sit silent. I go there and question whatever I listen or whatever I came to know or even whatever I read. You have to spend more time to educate yourself. You need to exceed expectation of your job. Yes. And Qatar Petroleum in specific, whenever we try to, see that the people who work in Qatar Petroleum, we divide them in 3 categories: meeting expectation, below expectation, above expectation. Your target has to be above expectation, and above expectation doesn't come like that. You have to spend effort. Effort has to be spent from yourself. There could be, you might have difficulties. We work in different organizations, not as an engineer, maybe as a doctor or maybe in economics or whatever side, but you have to seek for opportunity which could make you above expectation. That will happen only if you go and search and ask and do extra work than others. Yes, you might spend more time in work first 5 years, but that will make you a success life. But make sure that the effort spent is targeted to your target, really, as encouraging or as to exceed the knowledge that you have. You must stay positive, motivated, and inspired. And for that, I give you an example. I was in a position that managing projects, and suddenly our the manager has promoted to other higher position. Then someone else came to the position. I didn't feel sad. Actually, I felt happy that I have to deal with him. And actually, I spent more effort that to explain to them and to make sure that the project will run effectively. Because previously, I didn't say, well, I should have taken that position. Because what's meant to be for you will reach you. And not by your name, by your success. And people will know about you. That's why later on, when the opportunity for the latest project as a director or executive director for the new port project, it came to me. I didn't ask for it because you made yourself. It's not made by others. So really be positive about any changes that could come to you, which could be seen as a negative for you. Someone come as your director, but in reality you deserve it. You feel that you deserve it, but don't feel sad about it. Opportunity will come to you. Now, I hope it didn't take much of time. I'll try to go fast as well. You will attract the attention of employers if you can. One, work in diverse environment. And that happened to me. I work actually by studying in the United States, mixing with other people from different cultures, working in United States, and working as well in UK, Leatherhead, working in Tokyo, Japan. I work in different fields. I gain lots of experience by just mixing with others, with having different cultures as well, different experience. When I work with engineers, but even the engineering knowledge I gain from Japanese, let's say, origin different than the engineering knowledge I gain from the UK or British people and so on. So that's built up a really great knowledge. And for that, I gave example. One time when I was in UK, I was there as one of the QB engineers, and I asked them to be part of the company itself, not being paid by the Qatar Petroleum. I want to be paid by the company itself to learn more, to be really under the spot, and that's really enhanced my knowledge a lot. Now, manage the time and priorities, acquire knowledge. And acquire knowledge is important to us, because if you have a good knowledge, you can make a good success of your management. As example, one time I was the chairman for the technical and commercial evaluation for a project, which was budgeted around 8 billion. And we received budget bids for above 10 billion and different bids, different prices. We managed to award the contract for about 6.5 billion or so. And that's why, because we exercise our knowledge. We eliminated the risk, we have studied the scope again, we have done lots of exercise to make sure that really what we will be paid to do the right job that we need. So that came because of the knowledge that we gain. Communicate effectively, definitely. Develop professional competencies. And you have to as well develop professional competencies, master the tools and techniques of one's craft, acquire formal training, and keep abreast of new competencies. Yes, you need to know if they're good. If you face any opportunity, take it, but evaluate it first. If that's a right opportunity, take it. I was there in QB for a long time. There were lots of opportunity I didn't take because it was questionable. But whenever there will be an opportunity, don't leave it. Especially training opportunity. People need to be trained with time. Don't sit there for 5 years doing the same job. If there is if you keep repeating yourself, then by default you will not going to be productive. So train yourself. Try to look for a proper opportunity, but has to be stable. Solve problems. Yeah, for solving problems, you might come across a problem which really you need to think outside the box. That's what we said. And one time there were a case against Qatar Petroleum by a contractor, and it was against Qatar Petroleum for hundreds of millions. But by that I was forced to study the Qatari law. I'm an engineer and I was forced to look at the Qatari law. I looked at the Qatari law because I have to make a decision. Yes, I'm not going to be a lawyer, but I looked at the Qatari law, I studied it to have enough experience to question the lawyers that will present us in the court. And thanks God, we managed to discuss with the contractor now less than 10% of what he asked for fairly. What I mean is that we look at what's fair to be paid for him. But that happened. It come that I have to do something. I'm an engineer, I'm management, but I don't know about the law of Qatar. But then I studied the law. I studied the law to make sure that we made the right decision. So you might have come across things like that. You might come across you are doing a business, but then you need to study something around you to make sure that fill the gap that you require at that time. Contribute to a team. Yes, because we built up a team, we managed to one of the success in my life when I managed to complete the Ras Laffan Port Expansion project with 35 million man hours without any LTI, lost time injuries. Why? Because we built a team to make sure that we work in a safe environment. As well, we have completed the common cooling water project in Ras Laffan of budget over 3 billion. قطر ريال, in time with the right quality, with the right budget. Why? Because of team effort, not only myself, but we managed how to make that everybody work targeted to whatever he's specialized at to achieve the overall global target. Deal positively with all unexpected changes. Yes, you might come across unexpected changes, you have to deal with them positively. Perform with integrity. Golden rules, treating others as you would like to be treated. Yes. Think critically. Seek relevant information for the task at hand. Anticipate the consequences of course of actions. And finally, I would like to say that knowledge earns you respect. Knowledge gives you an edge over others who lack it. Knowledge secures you career progression. Knowledge is the power. More knowledge you know, more powerful. And that's a statement made by Ralph Waldo Emerson, which means that knowledge is the power. Knowledge doesn't mean that only data, it means data, experience. Knowledge means hand experience, thinking, representing others. Knowledge means management. Under knowledge there are plenty of things. You have to cover them. As much you cover, as much as you will be powerful. And believe me, that people will come to you rather than you will be seeking opportunity. Opportunity will come to you. Thank you. Sorry for the long speech, but there are lots of things to say, but thank you again.
I would like to thank our opening speaker, our opening remarks. It is great to see an example of a young Qatari who was able to succeed in such a way and be the executive director, the CEO of the port company in Qatar, and to listen to him talk about his career and talk about how he succeeded is a good example for Arab youth and for the new generation in the Arab world about how to succeed. So thank you again. Help me thank him one more time. I'd like to invite the two panelists of the first panel, Dr. Tariq Youssef, to the podium. Would you please join me? Have a seat. I'm going to introduce the panel. We will deal with technology. It's okay. It is my great pleasure to be in Qatar and to be moderating the first panel of this important symposium on Arab youth and employability. I believe this symposium on Arab youth and employability might be able to take the pulse of a very vital population in the Arab world. I have no doubt you all know how dynamic this population has been since January 2011 till now. We all have been watching with interest and excitement about what the Arab youth have been asking for, demanding, and expecting. This symposium is about them. This symposium is about their future. This symposium is about the future of the Arab world. During the symposium, we will discuss commonalities and differences in the different parts of the Arab world with regards to youth. And we will assess the situation of the Arab youth, and hopefully towards the end we will talk about the future of the Arab youth. To be able to do that, we will start with a panel about the present status, and we will look at challenges and opportunities they face. Dr. Tariq Youssef is our first panelist. Many of you know him by reputation, if not all of us know him by reputation. His reputation precedes him. Dr. Youssef is presently the CEO of Silatech, an important think tank and action organization that dedicates itself to Arab youth. Prior to being the CEO of Silatech, he was the founding dean of the Dubai School of Government. He is a leading authority on the economies of the Arab world. His topic today will address economic and leadership challenges that face the Arab youth. Dr. Youssef, thank you.
Bismillah, salatu wassalam ala Rasulullah. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, May, for inviting me to this symposium. Thanks to all the organizers and the sponsors for making this discussion possible today in Doha on a subject that I think many of us have followed in the last few years, certainly in the last year, as May has rightly suggested. And many of us now have been asked or are forced to think through the implications of ongoing events, the changes underway, changes to come for youth in the region. Now, I come to this agenda both as somebody who's been analyzing and thinking through it, and someone who now is trying to do something about it. And so forgive me for being blunt and being perhaps presumptuous in some of the assumptions or premises for thinking about this agenda at the moment in what I'm about to say. I'll try to sort of summarize everything in a couple of important bullets or pillars under the broad headline of thinking about Arab youth at this moment of the Arab Spring. I think it's fair to say that just a little over a year ago, that many of us had assumed that conditions on the ground in the region, conditions affecting youth, had not only worsened, but deteriorated to a degree where only further deterioration, if not outright explosions in social settings and political systems, would be one way of resolving and matching, dealing with the challenges that had made themselves explicitly, persistently, and very clearly present. Now, in some of the analytical work I was associated with in the last few years, we had come around to a very clear understanding of what these issues were about. In thinking about Arab youth, our understanding, and this would be, I think, bullet number one in my remarks, the challenges facing Arab youth were ones of broad conditions of exclusion from society, from politics, and from economics. The framework that led us to essentially say this out loud, repeat it, and advocate on behalf of it was one that asked the following question. For the generation of youth born after the 1980s in the Arab world, how many of them have been successful in making the important transition from being youth to being adults? Transitions that require education, require employment, require family formation, and require civic engagement. If one was to pose the question this way, and away and beyond from the simplistic, not that it's not important, but it is one piece of the puzzle, the obsession with jobs and employment, one can begin to see the larger context for the problems of youth unemployment. And that is, it was really about exclusion of a generation that had come to dominate increasingly societies in numbers, that was becoming increasingly disenfranchised, and whose ability to make the transition from youth to adulthood through marriage, through education, through job opportunities, was increasingly difficult. The roots to this are known to most of you, but I would say bullet two of what I'm about to say would be to suggest that in fact the roots of this problem and why this problem had become a perennial question in the Arab world and why so little was done about it successfully, consistently across countries, even the rich countries of the Arab world, was that the roots of the problem were deeply embedded in our societies. They were institutionalized. They went to the heart of values and norms and expectations by families, by youth themselves, by governments that set in motion policies and kept them in place that made it increasingly difficult for this large cohort of youth to successfully make the transition. Anytime you talk about institutional reforms, and this is bullet 3, you have to talk about big projects for policy reform. Institutional reforms goes to the heart of how societies see themselves, organize themselves. And in the Arab world, I would say 40, 50 years of doing the same thing had created sources for resistance, had created a lot of inertia, and it made it difficult for countries and regimes that were not flexible, that were highly rigid in many areas, and regimes that saw political stability at any cost as their primary objective, made it difficult for them to address institutional reform. Bullet number 4, if you believe everything I've said so far, and I hope you don't, bullet number 4 would be that in fact institutional reforms in education, in labor markets, in marriage markets, in housing markets, require grand efforts. Grand efforts that typically involve political will, involve visionary leadership, or, as we saw in the Arab Spring, outright political revolutions and rejections of the systems as they stood. I think it is in that context that the Arab Spring should be understood not only as a rejection of regimes and systems that had failed to meet the demands and address the aspirations of the young in the region, but as opportunities to engage in big projects of reform. And I would say, bullet number 5, big projects of reform for youth under the banner of this symposium, Youth Employability, will typically involve focusing on the labor market and the education market, or the education system. These two are so intertwined from day one in the lives of our youth that addressing one of them without the other, tinkering only with one or both without looking at them as institutions with values and norms and expectations and those who win under certain conditions and those who lose. Only that view, in my humble perspective, or only that approach to reform, systemic reform, a reform that is comprehensive, that is deeply rooted, that would be what is required. That would be what the Arab Spring has done to create opportunities for in the countries going through change at the moment. You need to focus on labor markets and you need to focus on education systems. Let me just develop that a little bit, May, and I'll do so and I'll stop very briefly so that I don't lose the attention, hopefully, of the audience. By focusing on labor markets and education systems, we're not only thinking here of the incentives for teachers, or the curricula for education, or the wages and salaries of those who occupy jobs. We're thinking of the rules of the game for those entering through these markets. And these rules often start with expectations and hopes and ambitions for youngsters going through the education system. The signals for the kind of education they will get at a young age are often set by the labor market affecting those who are already employed. If every signal you get from the labor market suggests that your best hope of securing an income, of achieving job security, of settling down, getting married, and achieving an important milestone in your transition to be an adult involves getting a job in the public sector, then you will, in fact, invest in precisely those skills that will get you a public sector job. And your parents will invest in precisely those skills and direct you and shape your expectations so that your education, in fact, is geared towards passing a test, achieving a degree, producing a diploma, and maximizing your chance of achieving a public sector employment. That is the the nature of this link between education and employment in our part of the world, and that in the absence of vibrant private sectors, dynamic alternatives to existing provision of education, and heavily embedded expectations about what constitutes success and what constitutes failure, part of a system we created is what we need to deal with at the moment. Now, in the countries going through change, and I'll confine my comments only to those, the Libyas, the Egypts, the Tunisias, and hopefully the Syrias and Yemen soon, these countries have, according to this logic at least, a profound opportunity to reset the rules of the game. Now, I have to also confess under bullet number 6 that these are 5 to 10 year projects of reform. These are projects of reform with winners and losers. Winners who have to wait, and losers who will see the consequences of any change now and will fight it and resist it. In a vibrant, politically dynamic context with open civil societies and participation of youth in national dialogues, you can get everyone to pay attention to the 10-year scenario and somehow overcome the resistance that would happen immediately in the short term. Nonetheless, and this will be bullet number 7, you need to deal with the short-term consequences, and you need to deal with them now. If the economies of Egypt and Tunis and Libya fail in the short term, they will complicate politics long term, and they will make it difficult to engage in the kinds of reforms that will bring about the long-term results. Case in point, for example, would be the demands for the public sector right now in Egypt to intervene by creating jobs, and to create them immediately, and to create them through public sector hiring. Now, this might be politically the right thing to do, but it does reinforce and send the signal also that, in fact, it is the public sector that will solve the problems. It will be the public sector that will continue to be the only viable source of stable, productive, long-term employment for large segments of society. So managing the short term while in fact engaging in real, genuine, grassroots, comprehensive projects of creating employability that is sustainable, that's productive, that's outside of the public sector, that doesn't revolve around you having a degree to get a job, but revolves around skill accumulation and lifetime learning, as the opening speaker has suggested, and where in fact the private sector becomes not only an alternative, but maybe the best alternative. That would be the moment in which we, through the Arab Spring, can in fact, in the countries going through change, set the stage for newer forms of education reform, newer projects for and alternatives to job creation, and help to restructure the relationship between education and employment with a long-run view. A view that, in my humble opinion, will not only allow us to solve current problems, but will allow us to sustainably deal with the practical solutions and the demands of the next 15 to 20 to 25 years. Now, and this will be my final remark, I promise, much of this might be confined to the countries going through the Arab Spring, but I would say also the Gulf countries, the countries that have been largely immune to revolutionary change, need to find creative ways of overcoming resistance to change, to reform, and develop alternatives outside of the public sector to youth employability. I would say that was the challenge 10 years ago. It's the challenge now, except at the moment we have a real, genuine opportunity to get it done. And that, I think, is why I have moved from my previous job to Doha, hoping to be a part of real, practical experience in trying to bring about this change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tariq Youssef. An overview that's rich, that's insightful, that's analytic, that makes us reflect and think, and that enriches us with knowledge and analysis. Thank you. Our second speaker is Mr. Mohammed Al-Maraihi. He is the Director of the National Manpower Development at the Ministry of Labor in Qatar. Prior to that, he was the Director of the International Relationships of the ministry, and he was the director of شؤون الخدمة المدنية والإسكان of civil service. That's right. And we are very pleased to have Mr. Muhammad with us, and his topic is going to be on Qatarization and the needs of the job market. After we heard an excellent overview of the Arab world in general, of the dynamic youth in particular in the countries where change is happening, we will hear kind of a case study on Qatar. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلاة الله على سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. First, I would like to thank the organizer, Qatar Foundation, GE, and VHI 360. I'll be doing my presentation in Arabic. It's applied by law. I have to speak in Arabic, so if you need to put the translation. قبل لا أبتدي بالبرزنتيشن كان عندي تعليق على الأخ العنين الدكتور في الجايدنس، وفعلا عندكم معظم كلام يكون يعني محور عن القطريين والتخطيط، بس الجايدنس مهم عندنا. الجايدنس مهم واحنا مهملين. انا بقول قصه صغيره شوي يمكن طلع الاخوان القطريين يفهمونها اكثر. بس في طفل، يعني مو طفل، خلينا نقول في المرحله الدراسيه الاولى، فكان ابوه دائما يقول لك ما ابغى شيء قال خلص الثانويه وعقب تعال، خلص الثانويه وعقب تعال. الولد شد حيله خلص الثانويه، جا قال حق ابوه بالسياره، قال لا ابوه انطر شوي بس لما تبتدي الجامعه ناخذك سياره. قال اي جامعه؟ ما في اتفاق بيننا على الجامعه، احنا اتفاقنا ثانويه، انا خلصت الثانويه، انتهى دوري هني. فهذا اهميه الجايدنس اللي احنا نتكلم عنه. المشاريع الجديده اللي صايره شكل مشروع الميناء الحديث، مطار الدوحه الدولي، احنا في نفس الوقت نوجه الاخوان القطريين هالمشاريع فيها وظائف كثيره، بس في نفس الوقت بعد نطلب من هذه الجهات انها يعني عمر المشروع هذا بيتم 4 سنوات وانت بديت فيه من الاي تو زد، بعد في نفس الوقت تبتدي بالعنصر البشري، شكل ما قال الدستور، شكل ما قال سمو الامير الله يحفظه، سمو ولي العهد، العنصر البشري هو اللي احنا نستثمر فيه. فمع استثمارنا في الميناء الجديد، مع استثمارنا في الميناء جميع المشاريع، لا ننسى العنصر البشري القطري. يعني ما حيكلفنا اعتقد less than 1% من قيمة المشروع. فالأخ يعني أنا أعتقد إنه ما شاء الله عليه ما هو مقصر. فنبتدي الحين في البرزنتيشن. أنا أول شيء ببتدي بالإطار القانوني اللي هو للقطريين واللي أعطاهم الأولوية وكل شيء. المادة 28 من الدستور، المادة 18 من قانون العمل، قرار مجلس الوزراء تقدير الوظائف، المادة 14 من قانون موارد بشرية اللي هو دائما اعطاء الاولويه للقطريين. انا معظم كلامي بيكون متمحور حول القطريين، بس ما يمنع من استفاده غير القطريين منا، لان الفرصه موجوده للقطريين ولغير القطريين. والقرار الاميري 35 لسنه 2009 لانشاء وزاره العمل. الاستراتيجيه المقترحه هي تامين التشغيل الامثل للباحثين عن اعمال المواطنين. احنا لما نقصد ان التشغيل الامثل يكون الرجل المناسب في المكان المناسب حسب مؤهلاته، حسب احتياجاته من التدريب والتأهيل. وزارة العمل تقوم بهالشيء. طبعا احنا عندنا ما شاء الله والاخ جيسون هنا عندنا مع نورث اتلانتيك اتفاقية ندرب ونأهلهم يدشون للسوق للليبر ماركت. خلينا نقول فت، مش كواليفايد بس فت انهم يدشون سوق العمل خاصة القطاع الخاص. هذا تكلمت عنه أنا طبعا تأهيلهم وفق احتياجات سوق العمل، تشجيع تطوير التعليم الجامعي وتقوية احتياجات سوق العمل والتخصصات العلمية. وهذا يعني مهم احنا نوجههم. احنا تكلمنا عن التوجيه المنزلي عن قبل شوي اللي قلناه، بس خلينا نتكلم عن التوجيه راح نتكلم عن التوجيه المدرسي. عندك التوجيه المدرسي مهم كثير. يعني أنا عارف إن في موجه في المدارس الثانوية، موجهين في الجامعات. ذكرنا في أمريكا ما تقدر توقع ريجستريشن شيت إلا يكون الأدفايزر موقع عليها قبلك، عقب تروح تسجل المواد. عندنا لا أو خليني أقول ضعف. المفروض الموجه أو المرشد يوجه الطالب لاحتياجات سوق العمل. ايش احتياجات سوق العمل؟ ممكن كثير منكم يقول احتياجات انا لحد الان ما اعرفها، بالعكس خش على اي موقع لاي شركه، قطر فاونديشن فور اكزامبل، شوف الوظائف المطلوبه موجود. ارجع لوزاره العمل بتلقى تقريبا 60 الى 50% نفس الوظائف المطلوبه، نفس التخصصات المطلوبه. نرجع خلينا نقول للاشغال، للتخطيط العمراني، للبلديه، هذه كلها وظائف مطلوبه. يعني التوجيه سهل. احتياجات سوق العمل نقدر نشوفه بوضوح. ممكن احنا عندنا تقصير السنوات السابقه، بس الحين لازم احنا نفوكس على اساس انه بشكل ما قال الدكتور ان يعني متطلبات مخرجات التعليم لازم تتوافق مع احتياجات سوق العمل، وهذا مهم. احنا نركز على الوظائف العليا والتخصصيه. الوظائف المتوسطه تقريبا تشبعت شكل ما قلت، مرينا بفتره فيها كلها ثانويه وعقب ما في عندنا عدد كبير من الثانويه. فهذه الوظائف قياديه ما يشغلها القطري ويثبت وجوده فيها، معناته احنا لحد الان تطور التقدم نرجع 50 سنه للوراء. هذه مهمه بالنسبه لنا. 99% الوظائف اللي في الحكومه الحين معظمها قطريه، وحتى رجعنا للقطاع الخاص معظم مدراء الموارد البشريه 90% قطريين. هذا النسبة. احنا كوزارة عمل نطلب جميع الجهات انه يكون عندها نسبة، وهذا مو عيب ولا هو غلط، هذه جميع الدول تطلبها. وحتى لو رجعنا للدول الأوروبية معظم الجهات عندها نسبة. طبعا نتكلم عن الدول اللي حوالينا اخوان خليجيين، احنا تقريبا اقل نسبة نطلبها، احنا نطلب 20% مع حصر بعض الوظائف. عندنا 127 وظيفة، هذه للقطريين ما يتعين عليها للقطريين، واحنا نسميها الوظائف الكتابية والإدارية، وهي بسيطة ما تحتاج لها ذاك التريننج. انت تقدر تأهل واحد في خلال من 3 إلى 6 شهور ويكون مؤهل للعمل. توسيع إطار تشغيل المرأة. احنا لحد الآن، أو خلنا نقول احنا مرتبطين بعاداتنا وتقاليدنا، واكثر دولة خليجية مرتبطة بعاداتها وتقاليدها قطر، من ناحية حتى ممكن حتى الاخوان الاجانب يلاحظوا يعني اختلاط عندنا شوية. الحجاب موجود، العمل في اماكن فيها شبهة خلينا نقول، او يعني من ناحية الريليجن موجودة. فاحنا نوسع رقعة عمل المرأة في القطاع الخاص بتوجيههم وارشادهم. انه مش كل اختلاط. انت لما تشتغل مع زميل اوكي، ما هذا مو باختلاط. الاختلاط لما تختلي غرفة واحدة، اما انك تشتغل مع واحد مكتب وبينك وبينه بارتيشن وما يعتبر اختلاط. احنا ما نحاول انفورس ات، بس نحاول نوجه للامور اللي تحتاج توجيه وفيها مغالطات شوي. هذا المهم. دائما احنا نطالع احتياجات سوق العمل مع توازنهم الموجود اللي عنده. يعني ما نبغي نغرق السوق كله بثانويه وخلي شورت في المؤهلات العليا. لهالسبب معظم احنا عندنا الثانويه شكل ما قلت عندنا مع كليه شمال اصلا في اتفاقيه، احنا نأهلهم نبعثهم للدبلومه. على بعد الدبلومه اذا شفنا مستوى جيد ممكن انه يواصل ويكون مخرج. ممكن واضح الكلام من اللي على السلايد التقطير وايش المطلوب منه مناسبة، سواء عن طريق تعيين مباشر او الاحلال. والاحلال هنا انا ممكن اشرح لكم كلمتين. يعني في وظائف من الوظائف اللي مشمولة بالتقطير وفي قطريين، فالاولوية للقطريين. هذه العملية نموذج لعملية التخطيط كامل الاستراتيجية، الخطوات اللي بتجي ترشيح، تحديد الباحثين، التوجيه والإرشاد، الموائمة بين احتياجات سوق العمل. هذه الإجراءات طبعا هي ماشية مع الاستراتيجية: التسجيل، التصنيف، تسجيل الاحتياجات، المقارنة، التوجيه والإرشاد، الترشيح، ومن ثم التعيين. المعوقات اللي نواجهها احنا، وهذا بعد تكلمنا فيه، اللي هو عدم توافق إخراجات التعليم مع احتياجات سوق العمل. مواجهة يعني موجودة. انخفاض المؤهلات التعليمية والخبرات العملية للباحثين عن العمل في بعض المجالات، وخاصة لما نجي نتكلم في القطاع المصرفي. القطاع المصرفي يبغي له خبرة، يعني يبغي له باحث مع الشهادة. يعني أنا بجيب لك محاسب خرج تو محاسب وشغال في القطاع المصرفي، حيسوي لك نفس اللي يسوي الهاي سكول، اللهم انه يحتاج له وقت انه يتدرب على العمل ويكمل. الالتزامات واللي تكلمنا عنها اللي هي العادات والتقاليد. هذه سوت عندنا كان مشاكل في بداية عملنا في 2008 و2007 إنشاء الوزارة، إنشاء الإدارة، إن صار في تنقلات كثيرة، خاصة من القطريين اللي هو اللي يطلع من القطاع الحكومي للقطاع الخاص، ومن القطاع الخاص نفسه للقطاع الخاص الآخر. وهذا بصراحة يعني خلني أقولها لسبب واحد، إن إحنا ما عندنا شيء اسمه أو قانون اللي هو المينيمم ويج أو الحد الأدنى من الأجور أو كيف تبني الأجر عليه. في القطاع المصرفي نفسه يختلف الراتب من مكان لمكان على نفس الوظيفة، وهذه مشاكل تواجه. ضعف رغبة المواطنين. بنت الفكرة في جميع المواطنين أن السكيورتي بيكون موجود في القطاع الحكومي. في القطاع الخاص ما في أمان، ما في سكيورتي. فالحمد لله احنا يعني غيرنا هاي النظرة، ان نفس البنفتس اللي بتحصلها في القطاع الحكومي، نفس البنفتس اللي بتحصلها في القطاع الخاص، نفس الحقوق والواجبات اللي لك في القطاع الحكومي نفسها موجودة في البرايفت سيكتور. خذنا وقت فيها لكن الحمد لله اقتنعنا الآن فيه، ولحد الآن نحاول الشكل ما قلت فوق ان الجميع يعني جميع اللي يبغون يتوظفون اللي هو يرجع للقطاع الحكومي، لأن نظرية موجودة عندنا. هذه شوي ما أدري كيف أنا أشرحها لكم النظرية، بس وجدت. يعني يجي واحد متخرج وعنده شهادة في الآي تي أو عدة، بس لأنه ينطر البس أوفر يتم سنة بدون شغل، فصارت بمزاجية، وبعدها ينحسب عليك unemployment، وعدد مش بسيط. احتياجات سوق العمل أنا بقول بشكل سريع. يعني إحنا نعرف عندنا فوق المليون، اللي نقصده فوق المليون يعني not included الليبرز. إحنا توتال 1,700,000، الليبر ممكن 700 وشوي، إحنا وصلنا 1,800,000 وشوي. فالمليون هذيلا وظائف موجودة ممكن إن نعينها. هذه الاحتياجات. احنا غير الوظائف اللي تنشأ جديدة، غير الاحتياجات اللي بتجي جديدة، وخاصة احنا بنطلع ل 2022 اللي هو كأس العالم، غير رؤية قطر ل 2030 احنا ماشيين عليها الحين في فيز 1 من 2011 إلى 2016. هذه كلها يعني لازم ننظر لها، ولازم نوجه العالم على أو الإخوان القطريين على الاحتياجات اللي بنحتاجها خلال هالسنين هاي كلها. وهذا كمثل يعني موجود الوظائف اللي فعلا محتاجين لها للقطريين ولسنين قادمة. هني بس أنا حطيت أرقام إحصائية. إحنا طبعا بدينا في آخر 2007، وهذه الإحصائية لحد التاريخ مش طالع عندي، بس 13/9 أعتقد 2011. هذه السنوات اللي عيننا فيها الحين وصلنا حوالي 22,969 واحد من اللي تعينوا أو إعادة تعيينه أو عيد تعيين. نلاحظ أن في سنوات يمكن ارتفع فيها التعيين خاصة في 2009، بس عقب جينا نمشي بالافرج على ما نحسب. احنا عندنا الافرج حوالي 4000، لو جينا لاخر سنه اللي هو 2011 احنا نتكلم من لحد شهر 9 لحد الان ما خلصنا السنه، بس افرج عندنا سنويا 4000 من الثاني. شكرا لكم اخواني.
I'd like to thank Mr. Mohammed Al-Marihi for presenting the situation in Qatar, and I would like to open the floor for questions and answers. And after the questions and answers, we'll take a short time for questions and answers. I'll try to very quickly wrap up the first panel by highlighting maybe 3 major points, and then we'll take a break and then come back for the second panel. So the questions can be addressed to one panelist or to both, depending on what you would like to ask. Please raise your hands and let's hear your questions. And whoever would like to ask a question, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself, your name and your organization. Who would like to start?
Basically, my question was about the new generation.
Yes.
Now, how do you see the new generation behavior towards the labor market?
Excellent.
In terms of the youth, in terms of the nationals as well.
How do you see the behavior of the new generation of the Arabs, right? Arab new generation, that is the question.
I think the last time I made an assumption about the new generation, I was flat out wrong. The last published work I was involved in on youth in the Arab world was in a volume under the title A Generation in Waiting. The assumption being that Arab youth were waiting for change to come from the top, and that was the only way that change would come about to address the needs they had. Well, I think 6 months after the publication of that work, the youth demonstrated to us an incredibly energetic capacity for bringing about change in ways that we never dreamt were possible. I leave perhaps the rest of the answer to your question to my dear friend Rami, because he was involved most recently, and he's on the second panel. He was involved in a situational analysis of Arab youth. But I would sort of stop here by noting that a lot of the assumptions we make are based on erroneous readings and somehow assume that the status quo is sustainable, stable, and will indefinitely last. We've been all incredibly surprised, and not only have the youth surprised us in the region, they've surprised the world, and they may be providing an inspiration now to other youth beyond the borders of the Arab world. I was fascinating. Forgive me for maybe.
Please continue.
Just a few days ago, as soon as Prime Minister Berlusconi stepped down in Rome, some of the initial interviews with protesters in the street asked them for their feelings as a legendary political figure had just stepped down, and asked them why they were protesting. The second interviewer, at least on TV that I was watching, suggested that in fact what was happening in that particular piazza in Italy was a mini Tahrir Square, that the Italian youth were drawing an inspiration from their neighbors further south in how to take the political game to the highest level.
The change came from the bottom up, not top down. So now that the change has happened, and we are seeing changes in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, where do we go from here? The job opportunities and the unemployment in particular is not going to disappear. So probably we're still living in the euphoria at this time, and change and Tahrir Square will not create jobs. So where do we go from here to address one of the causes of the Arab Spring, which is job opportunities and unemployment? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shaki.
أعتقد اليوث they are Russian. Okay. أعتقد they are ما أعرف. the youth, they are rushing it, I think. يعني reform will take time. Reform will take time. Reform will take time. أنا شكل ما قلت في beginning اليوث هم اللي عملوا الثورة في جميع الدول هذه العربية اللي محتاجينها بس التايم، وأعتقد إنها بتصير الأمور إن شاء الله. أقدر أجاوب عليه كجواب المعاشي.
Tarek, would you like to add?
I think Ibrahim is provoking us.
I think so. I do agree with you.
He's provoking us. Knowing
Ibrahim, he is provoking us.
Knowing fully well. Knowing fully well that we're all struggling with this question. And more importantly, the countries that are going through this change are struggling to deal with this question. I don't think the answer to the question is necessarily an impossible one to attain or think through, but the modality through which we address it has to change from the past. Just a case in point, in the countries going through transition, Libya, Tunis, and Egypt, I cannot imagine grand projects of reform, bottom up, taking place without a broad national dialogue happening. That national dialogue requires that you protect the space for civil society that is now emerged. And I would say not only protect it, but institutionalize the protection for it and engage with youth in the way that others did. Just a case in point, I'd say we all recall the transitions that took place in Eastern Europe and the Baltic states in the early 1990s. Youth and youth groups and youth organizations were an integral part of the dialogue to create a new national vision. If that can be achieved, I think the practical solutions and the approaches to solving problems will be, in fact, attained. We just have to get a handle on the transition from this point in time to the long run vision that we set and how we engage with societies, while at the same time, and I admit to a problem here, that in the short term, things will get possibly worse, and you might have to do things in the short term that you in the long term want to undo, just to buy yourself some time. So this is the $1 million question. I'm sure our dear friend Ibrahim is probably writing a paper about it. We just wanted to test it.
Thank you. Another question, yes, in the back, up there, really up there. Yes, please go ahead.
Othman Sadoki from London University. Thank you both for your presentation. I really appreciate it. My question is mainly about Qatarization, and if it really comes in line with bullet number 7 of Dr. Tarek. Do you see that Qatarization will enhance employability of youth?
I hope that's what we're aiming for, inshallah.
My question is actually for the Department of Labor. I apologize, it's a very self-interested question. As I understand all the codes for Qatarization now, they don't allow for, please tell me if I'm wrong, they don't allow for student interns or student externs who have long-term, summer-long or semester-long or year-long internships or externships to count towards a company's Qatarization quotas. And I was just wondering if there were plans to change that, if I was wondering if there were ever going to be plans to change that, to allow students.
We're working on it. Let's say we're working on it. I think this is one of Qatar vision in 2030, and inshallah.
Hello, my name is Andrea Bertone. I'm an FHI 360, the director for the Center for Gender Equity. Thank you very much for your presentations. They were both very eloquent. My question is, how can the Western countries, United States, Europe, or Asian countries help or hinder the goals of Arab countries to improve employability of youth? What is the role of Western companies, Western governments, or Asian companies, Asian governments, or Asian labor?
We need to force my dear friend Mohammed to answer the question. I mean, one way of answering your question is to pose it in the following way. What should the world do to support the broad goals of the Arab Spring? So let me just take that part of it. And I think there are more things they can do than they are doing now. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that many of the countries we traditionally look to for help. So if you happen to be in North Africa, you're looking to Europe. If you happen to be in Egypt, you're thinking about the United States of America, followed by Europe. The Europeans and the Americans have now incredibly difficult budget constraints, domestic policy priorities, and there is very little they can do by way of addressing these with ambition plans for either intervention or cooperation that involve commitment of funds or commitment of even technical resources. With this reality, there are ways in which I think we can still explore learning from the experience of others, transferring the experience and the knowledge within the various programs that have been adopted around the world to deal with similar situations. We need not rediscover the rules of physics in everything we do post the Arab Spring. We're not the first region to go through a political transition, nor the first region to have high rates of unemployment. I think the US can help, the Europeans can help, the Latin American countries can help us, and even the Asians. I think that is where the challenge is right now, thinking through ways in which learning can happen, new modalities for cooperation can take place, and these, in my humble opinion, will have to take place somewhere below the official government level and somewhere above the populist level. We need civil societies, we need think tanks, educational institutions, and everyone in this space to essentially connect and find ways of committing resources, thinking, and begin the process of experimenting with programs, piloting them, scaling them up. Given the reality I've just described about the attention span of policymakers, the domestic issues, and the finite availability of financial resources, that would be where the cooperation would take place. I would also add at the end that, in fact, given the Arab countries, especially the Gulf countries, are rich with financial resources and can, in fact, help plug some of the gaps on the financial side, there is a way for all these parties to cooperate to bring about the desired results. But it will take doing things differently, and it will take thinking outside of the official modes of operation. That has not happened yet. I suspect it will take some leadership in the next few months, years, by leaders in the business community, in the civic space, to bring about the desired result.
Thank you. Hamad, would you like to add, please?
We have in the Labour Law Article number 57, I'm speaking in Arabic, that for each technician or each director you bring, you have to put at least 2 Qataris to pay as a schedule to pay them. And if you need help with this, experience with that, and they've been practicing it and doing it. Mainly this will answer a little bit of your question.
One, we heard that the fact that the institutions in the Arab world did not follow the pathway of reform made it difficult. However, the Arab Spring changed that status. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And the second is, second point is that education and the labor markets are intertwined. I think we all know that, but it deserves repetition and underlining and recognizing of how important the statement is. Education and labor market are intertwined, it's their nature. But the third point I think might be the most important, having recognized the first two, that reforms takes time. However, we need to pay attention to the short term and the short-term needs, civil society, needs think tanks, needs whatever is under the government and above the masses to be able to help us in that transition. Please join me in giving a hand to our excellent panelists. Welcome back. We're going to start, and I know the others will be coming in. I know some are just continuing the discussion that we had here that was very rich. Many told me that they really were impressed with the presentations and the discussion and the questions. So I'm sure they're continuing that discussion, but we invited them in and we will start. I must say that we are honored and very pleased to have Bob Cochran be the moderator of the second panel. Bob is the president and the chairman of GE Foundation. He flew in from New York today just to attend this session and be with us and moderate the second session. Bob, welcome. Thank you.
It was very exciting to be a part of the planning process for this, not knowing where it would lead to, and seeing the first half of this program come off so well. I think that the panelists, the opening discussion, the opening points were all not only valid, but they were very stimulating and have relevance in regions far, far beyond the Gulf region. So I want to thank you all for coming and contributing along the way. I have the wonderful opportunity now to be unaccountable in that the session before was about the analysis and looking at the problem, looking at the issue, using the data and using the research and research written by many of the people who spoke. And I have the challenge now to take a different look at this, to look and have two presenters come and talk about the types of solutions and innovations and policy changes that could be put in place and that we should think about in order to sustain this momentum. The challenge here is that while much has been written about the Arab Spring, much has been written about the other issues going on around the world today, and each of our panelists is a good researcher and writer in their own right, no one has written the future yet. And the future is up to the people in the Gulf, the people in Qatar, to determine how are we going to solve this issue on employability of youth and equity moving forward. And so let us get to our first two speakers and have some remarks before we start in with questions and answers moving forward. First up is Zamila Bunglawala. Zamila is a fellow of the Young Foundation, but more importantly was the program designer for Inspiring Aspirations program that focused on career development and mentoring in partnership with the Danish Center for Gender, Equity, and Ethnicity. She's also a visiting fellow for the Brookings Institution at the Doha Center, where she led research on business and knowledge economy and the employment aspirations of young Arabs. She's also a director in charge of strategy and projects for the Bridge International Dialogue. She's also author of Policies Affecting Arab Youth, the Centrality of Gender, Equity, and Inclusivity. So I'd like to introduce Zamila Bunglawala.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here, and to follow such great speakers is never easy, but I will try. The central focus is the Arab youth and the employment reality that they face. As other speakers have said, young people are an invaluable asset, but even more so when they're young, they're educated, they're motivated, and they're talented. And in the Arab region, this number is over 100 million young people. So this would be an asset in any part of the world. But the truth is, these young people also face high unemployment, public sector concentration, and limited female integration in the labor market, as well as wider society. So for the future, what we need to ensure is economic growth, stability, productivity, and innovation. And this needs to encapsulate men and women in the labour market and society. It would never work if we leave any part of society out of this equation. But equally, we need to recognise that the Arab Spring has shown us, as Tariq said, that the aspirations of young Arabs are very high, and they also have expectations which we will now need to meet through employment, through equity, through inclusivity and transparency. But let me just tell you a bit about how it is I'm here this evening. As mentioned, I did the research for the Brookings Doha Centre on the aspirations of young Qataris and young Emiratis in the labour market. And the idea was to interview young people who are still in university or who have recently graduated to understand their labour market aspirations, what it is they wanted to achieve, and whether or not their economy, their society, and their governments were able to help them to achieve these aspirations. Because otherwise, just giving young people education and then leaving them there is not in anybody's interests, let alone the young people themselves. So as we heard, Qatarization is a very positive policy which is trying to get more Qataris into the labour market. But let me just share with you the labour market statistics for Qatar. Qatar has a public sector employment level for Qataris at 83% of the Qatari population. Its private sector employment is 8%, whereas its mixed sector is 5%. Qatar is lucky that it has almost nil unemployment at 0.2%. But the male to female ratio is also something to pay attention to. Males make up 63% of the labour market here, whereas women are only 36%. There is a target, indeed, to increase the number of women in employment here. But when you look at how many women are actually graduates, you'll be quite surprised, and I'll bring you onto that in just a moment. But firstly, I want to just highlight what the obstacles are in the labour market in Qatar. So education is free, even up to university level, which is great, but we need to understand how it is these young people translate their education into employment to make sure that this is a worthwhile asset that they are utilising and that we as people in society and the economy are getting the best of too. But when I interviewed young people, they said, look, we're motivated, we have goals we want to achieve, and we want to live in Qatar and the UAE. These are our countries, we want to contribute. But the fact is, we have a lack of awareness of how to job search. We don't really know how to prepare for our jobs or where to go for careers advice. And while all these things and these services exist in society, they're not easily accessible or they're not well known about. So young people in university here also didn't even know there was a careers advisor on campus, which to many of us might seem anathema, but it's true. Young people don't know where to access their labour market support. Also, there is a system of vaster connection. We call it social capital in Europe, but it's very important in the labour market of how you connect to networks and how you access advice and jobs. Here in Qatar and the UAE, it's the same. The concept of vaster will enable you to find the job that you might want or that somebody knows that you need. If you don't have those networks, then you are really stuck and you're outside of the labour market. But also there was a problem of workforce readiness. Many young people said, I can't get a job because employers keep saying I don't have enough experience. But how am I going to get experience if I don't get a job? It's a cycle which many face around the world. But some of these things are overcome through work experience or internships, which are not well known enough yet in this part of the world. Young people look to their families, therefore, in the absence of careers advisors, for support on the labour market. Many of us do this. I still do this. I still ask my family for advice in the labour market. It's usually sound advice, but you also have to see what the context of that advice is. And here in Qatar and the UAE, again, the concept of the family was normally that the father worked in the public sector because the public sector was where most of the jobs were, and the mother was a homemaker. But now in the 21st century, lots of people might not want to do those things, or they might want to do those things and more. So only accessing family advice might be quite limiting for you. It might not help you reach your aspirations for the future. So we need to know how young people are going to access better advice. And when I spoke to a careers advisor at a university in the UAE, she said, listen, I organise seminars all the time to bring multinational corporations to the university to talk to young people. But young people never come to the seminars. So how are we going to make the connection? How is the careers advisor going to connect young people to jobs? We need to look at all of these things. Qatar has a great history of the Qatar Careers Fair, which has now been running for a few years now, and it expands every single year. But at the same time, young people need to be able to go to those careers fairs, get the right types of information, make the right sorts of connections, and those things need to lead to a job or work experience or building up skills of some kind. Otherwise, we're missing a trick in the labour market, despite all this investment that we're making. Now I'll come on to women. Young Arab women are remarkable. I can say that as a young European woman. They are ambitious, they're eager to progress, they want education, they want careers, they want businesses, they want a family, and they want to play an active role in society. And this is an ambition that we should all probably congratulate them for. Women also have great role models here in the Middle East as well, and they're inspiring women to achieve further and go further. And here are some statistics you may not know. 76% of Qatar university students are women. 75% of students in the UAEU are women. 80% of QSTP postgraduate students here in Qatar are women. So that gives you an idea of the high level of education that women in this part of the world have. They need jobs now to help utilize that education. I mean, QSTP is one of the most innovative tanks in this part of the world. If 80% of those students are women, just imagine what these women could contribute to the knowledge economy and innovation in Qatar. It's just magnificent. I don't think many countries in the world would have these statistics. However, as we heard earlier, despite the level of education and aspiration, there are many barriers that women face in the labour market. Some of them are economic. Many employers are not aware that women have these high education levels. Many of the jobs in these oil-rich and gas industrial societies are focused at males because that's how the industry was set up. But we need to now explore more gender-mixed environments or gender-sensitive workplaces so that we can utilize the women in these labour markets. There are cultural barriers as well. Many families struggle to accommodate the long hours culture that some work environments have, or the mixed environment, as we heard from our Qatari colleagues. But also the public sector is often seen as a safe environment to send people to work in, whereas the private sector isn't necessarily seen as safe. Not because it isn't, but just many people don't understand that the workplace in the private sector is dynamic and challenging, and that has positive benefits too. One woman said to me, she was working for a private sector multinational in the UAE, and she said, listen, I work 9-hour days here and I love it. I think it's challenging, it's rewarding, but at 6 o'clock every day my father calls me and says, when are you coming home, dinner's ready. And she said, you know, when I have children, I might not be able to meet these long hours, but I don't want to give up my job. So employers are going to have to find a way to be flexible, to allow for part-time working, to make sure that this talent is not lost in the labour market. Otherwise, what's going to happen when these women want to have children and families, which is their right to do? They're all going to have to leave the labour market, and suddenly all that education will be lost in the region. But also attitudes and perceptions. Many young women said to me, you know, I have this education, but I still know that a man's going to get a job over me. A man will be selected for the top salary, for the best training, or for the best job, and it's not fair. This may not necessarily be true, but this is the perception that some women have. So we need to make sure that we break those barriers as well that women themselves have, to say, you know, you have this education, you are equally capable of getting that job, but we need to ensure that we equip them to be able to get that job. So, do we have equity in this part of the world? In Europe, there's a great political movement about the word fairness. Is everything in society fair? Do the choices we make, are they based on fairness? And I'll just give you an idea of some of the things young people had said to me. Our Qatari colleague said that, you know, a lot of money is being invested in making sure that young people know their employment rights. But the truth is, many young men and women are not aware that job security is guaranteed by law in the public and the private sector, that pensions are guaranteed in the public and the private sector. Many young people were afraid to take jobs in the private sector because they thought at any minute they could lose their jobs if they weren't meeting their standards or performance, that they could be fired at any moment, or that even if they stayed in the private sector, they wouldn't be given a pension at the end of it. This is not true. The rights in employment are the same across the economy, but young people don't know this. But also, many young people don't understand the concept of flexible working or special leave requirements, where they're allowed to ask their employers for this flexibility in the type of work. Young people need to be understood in this way, that you can actually ask your employers for these rights. It's your right to do that. But if we don't educate them in this way, how are they ever supposed to know? Who would tell them? But also, there are negative perceptions of the private sector. As I mentioned, the sort of long hours culture, low pay, low prestige, and this negative perception overshadows a lot of the positive things that can be achieved in the private sector as well. I mean, Qatar employs about 1 million non-Qataris in the private sector here. It's a booming part of the economy, and there are many jobs that Qataris could do. And in the lead up to the World Cup, there will be even more in the retail and in the hospitality sector, in growing sectors that we haven't even yet started. But if we continue to have this negative perception, that 85% figure in the public sector that I quoted you at the beginning, that will not change. So we need to encourage young people to understand the positive benefits that the private sector can offer them. But at the same time, there is a big pay differential between the public and the private sectors. In Qatar and the UAE, a young Qatari in the private sector may start after graduation on 10,000 Qatari riyals a month. But in the public sector, at the same level of education, they may get 30,000 and above a month. This is a rational decision that people would have to make. Pay is a big determinant of what kind of job you're going to take and a big salary issue. But at the same time, it should not stifle the aspirations young people have. So we need to find a balance between the salary levels in the public and the private sectors. It is right that as a rich society, you redistribute your wealth and you can have high public sector salaries. But we need to encourage the other sectors in our economy to do the same, or to offer young people balanced types of careers so that they don't have to make these types of high pay, low pay salary decisions based on their careers, because they're going to be in jobs for a long time. So salary should not be the only decision that you make when you make your life choice. But also there's a geographic divide that many young people face, and women face this too. In the UAE as well as in Dubai, a lot of the jobs are in the city centres and they're very centric focused. But that means there's not as many jobs or this diversity of jobs outside of the city centres. And so we have unemployment in those regions, which actually disproportionately affects women, because women aren't as easily able to travel to city centres for long times. And so men may be able to move out of high unemployment areas or low diversity rich employment zones, but women won't. So we need to make sure as we grow our economies that we make sure that geographically we spread those jobs as well, especially because these are oil rich societies. So certain jobs may not exist outside the city centres, but if this sustains, then we'll continue to see a geographic divide being created, and then more dissent will be envisaged from that. So how do we reach the balance? One of my favorite words in Arabic actually is mizan. It means the balance. And how do we find the future in terms of policy, and how do we address the issues? Nationalization, Qatarization, Emiratization, these are very sound policies which were well intended to ensure that local populations were able to take advantage of local jobs. But at the same time, we need to make sure that these targets still focus on the aspirations of young people. Young people are not numbers, they're not just targets to be achieved. Qatari said to me, I was given a job but only because I was a Qatari. They didn't actually pay any attention to my training or development. We don't need to see that happen to young people. Young people are not just numbers. Also, female employment targets. Again, this is a worldly thing to do, to increase the number of women in employment. It's right that a government should set a target to increase that number. But female employment, as I said, some of the barriers that exist, this is not about changing a target, this is about changing hearts and minds. We're going to have to change the way we recruit, the way we work in our workplace environments, but also the flexibility that we give women, but also encouraging employers to become gender sensitive. Only that way we will get more women in the labour market. A target on its own will not achieve it. But also the Qatari and Emirati governments are both striving towards creating a knowledge economy. This is an amazing feat, and one which really will produce amazing results and already has produced amazing results. Entrepreneurship, innovation and economics is the future of any society that wants to see growth in jobs and innovation. And young entrepreneurs in both sides of this divide need to be able to get the support that they need. In Qatar, when I asked young people, if you wanted to start a business, what would you do? Many said, I'd ask my father for a loan. Why? What country this rich? Why are there not finance loans available for young entrepreneurs? Why are there not reward mechanisms available for young entrepreneurs? In the UAE, by contrast, actually, a lot of young people knew where they would get public finance from to be able to access to start up their businesses. But also, we need to ensure that innovation is supported by research and development, and that we find a combination between education in our education institutions and research and innovation, so that we can incubate innovation. Innovation always needs to be protected because it's such a long process. One idea can take several years to actually get to a product. Here at Education City, at the universities here and at Qatar University, you have some of the best minds working on innovation. We need to try and find a way that young entrepreneurs feel protected in this environment, so that their ideas are supported, they're incubated, and that they can see them forward to innovation. But equally, all of that takes time, energy, and money. And we need to recognize that people are entrepreneurs long before they actually produce a product. An entrepreneur is somebody that is just a creative thinker. We need to support that creative thinker to get to a product. And that takes time, energy, and money. And the education institutions in this part of the world need to find their role in doing that, as do organizations like Silitech. So I'm glad that Tarek is here. Oh, thumbs up to you. But no, absolutely, as Tarek said, this isn't always just the job of big institutions like government and the education and university outfits. It's also the job for what I call, as Tarek said, the middle, the balance of NGOs, of think tanks, of think and do tanks, but also of INGOs, of intermediary organizations, because young people will access these quicker and more interchangeably than they will go to formal big government institutions. So we need to make sure that all of this level of support is accessible to young people in the ways and methods that they are accessing it. But there are also many positive lessons, and there are great examples in both countries that I found of equity, of inclusivity and innovation. And we heard earlier from the engineer who came from QP, Qatar Petroleum has a brilliant, sector-wide commitment to employing nationals, male and female, and they do this through raising awareness in schools, in universities. They offer internships to young people, they offer student sponsorships. But the most strategic thing that QP does is it has an advisory board within its organization to actually look at where the next stream of talent is going to come from for this organization. It looks at what kind of numbers they're going to need of young people in each sector of discipline, and they find a way of how to make sure that those targets are met. And this is a sort of a pipeline mechanism for QP to make sure that young people in Qatar are utilized the best and they're fed through a career process. And more organizations need to be able to do this, because a young person doesn't just access a job, they want a career. So you need to give them that pipeline in your organization. And QP is a good example of that. But also universities are doing great things too. In the UAE, Zayed University and the UAE offer all their students 1 semester of internships with an organization. All final year students will spend 1 semester in an organization to gain soft skills, to gain work experience, to gain the skills that actually employers want: problem solving, communication, leadership. These things are not easily given to you in a classroom in a university. But we know that once you graduate, employers are going to look for these skills in you. So we need to make sure that our university institutions are genuinely equipping people to access jobs and to make sure that they have the right tools to be able to do that. But also the private sector has a role here too, as does the public sector. Graduate internships and graduate management training, these are brilliant opportunities to be able to nurture young talent and find them senior roles within your organization. And it starts from the graduate level to offering graduates training programs in communications, in leadership and middle management. And that way we will invest in young people and they will feel invested in. So their motivation will find a voice, their aspiration will find a need. And so we can make sure that that investment stays in these countries. Or even if we want it to go overseas, it's building on these people and their skills levels. So as I said, universities, the public sector and the private sector all has a role to play in making sure that the aspirations of young people are met. And then I come to the Arab Spring, why the aspirations are so important. This is a profound time and space opportunity in this part of the world to really show that we know what growth means, what progress means, what meeting the needs of young people actually means. Because a country's young population really is its future. In global competitive world, your young people, your young educated, motivated men and women are central to your survival. And especially when you are a country with a very small population, you cannot afford to get it wrong. There are only 300,000 Qataris. How many generations will we have to lose before we get this right? So the Arab Spring, as Tarek and others said, it may not have arrived in the GCC in violent ways, but it has inspired the GCC to actually make sure that young people's voices here are met too. But also young Arab men and women know what they want. They have clear expectations. I mean, the people I met were really, badass people. They knew what they wanted. And they know that they want to be a part of a society where growth is important, where inclusion is important, where equity doesn't just mean between men and women. It means between society and government. It means between civil society and family life. And these balances need to be found. But also inclusive and progressive employment policies are central. They have to include gender. Gender needs to be central. As I said, the education level of women is high and it's growing. If we do not increase the number of women in the labour market, this talent will be lost, and it will be lost for a generation or worse. But also governments need to plan strategically, and as others said, young people need to be part of this planning. The needs that young people have need to be incorporated into policies that we have. We can't just see young people as the recipients of policies or the consumption part of policies. They also demand policies, and therefore they should be part of the design of policies, how policies are formed and how they're executed. So what policies am I talking about? Qatar has a national vision, that's right, it's 2030, it's very ambitious, and it has brilliant tenets and excellent foundations. And it has a structure in place to make sure that government departments actually talk to each other, to make sure that energy is concerted, that coordination happens, and that planning is executed well. But at the same time, government needs to include the public sector, the private sector, the civil society and NGO and intermediary sector as part of this process. Government needs to make sure that there is a dialogue across the economy, because the economy isn't just government. Every sector in the economy has something to do with employment and jobs and meeting the aspirations of young people. So we need to make sure that government departments are strategically including policymakers, employment analysts, researchers, private sector, public sector employers, to make sure that we understand the needs of the economy now and into the future. But we also need to find ways that the social contract will be balanced, where the inequity or the unfairness between understanding of employment rights, between the understanding of workplace rights and gender sensitivity, but also inclusivity of men and women in the wider workspace, and also the performance issues and salary issues. These all need to be ironed out. We cannot have a society where there's so much imbalance, where young people's choices are stunted by the fact that salary levels are so different between the sectors. We need to find ways to balance these things. And young people are the best people to ask, because they know what jobs they want. So we need to find policies to match that. But also in developing a knowledge economy, we need to ensure that there is greater connectivity between research houses, education and policy tanks, and universities and government departments themselves, but also the private sector, because one of the biggest funders of innovation is the private sector. The research and development, once it's nourished and created, is often taken by the private sector into long-term projects. And we want young people to be able to harness those things and utilize those benefits as well. But on the very practical level, how are we going to ensure that young people's skills levels are increased and that they have greater talent to be able to enter the labour market? As other speakers have said, you can't just wait for people to graduate and then say, okay, how are we going to help you find a job? Internships are very important. And in many countries in the world, internships happen at high school level. We give young people at a very young age just a flavour of what it is to work, of what the work environment looks like, what the demands of the work environment are. And so we need to make sure that internships are required in high school now, just to give young people a flavour of what it might look like to have a career longer term. But also we should take lead from Zayed University and UAEU. All universities should offer internships for their final year students. So before they make their ultimate career choice, we have already equipped them with some labour market skills. We've already given them some labour market interaction, because otherwise we're sending them blind into the labour market without any idea of what the labour market will want. And we don't want young people to have to make so many bad choices before they make the right choice in the labour market, because that would be wasted talent. But also we need to encourage mobility and progression. The best economies are those where people are able to move around the economy. And our first speaker said, he did many different things, many challenging things, and they've enriched your life. And that's right, a job isn't just staying in one place for your entire career. It can be if that's what you want to be. But young people today have amazing demands, and they have great ideas of what it is they want to achieve. And usually that will require some mobility. So governments need to ensure that they will enable mobility between the public sector and the private sector, because we have concentration of people in the public sector, but we know that the private sector has great skills to offer them. So it's in the interest of the government even to just move people between sectors. In the UAE, I found that government departments were sending some of their brightest minds to organizations like Ernst & Young for the summer to say, can you just give them some soft skills training and some communications training, or just enable them to understand your organization, and then they'll come back to us and they'll have greater skills that we will utilize as a government. So we need to find better ways to move people around our labour market. But equally, we need to incentivize things called secondments, where young people who might want jobs in the public sector to give back to their government, but where they're supported to take jobs in the private sector, where they're guaranteed that their public sector job will be safe and they can come back to it. But at the same time, they will gain amazing skills in the private sector, a diversity of skills which everyone could utilize. But also mentoring. The first speaker again said, you should find your mentor. It's not very easy to find a great mentor. There are brilliant role models out there, but lots of people are very, very busy. And I would like to see where government departments or universities connect young people to great mentors, where you have a matching system, because it's hard to find the mentor that is right for you. You might have to go through a few to trial and error that. But it's a great lifelong support mechanism for a young person to have a mentor. I've had my mentor now since 2003. And we still connect and we still share stories, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. It isn't just him telling me everything I need to know, it's me telling him as well, what I as a young woman am engaging in the labour market. So we need to find a way that young people, after they leave university, still have a way of nurturing their careers, still accessing support. They can access this guidance from their families, of course, but career service support should come from other spheres as well, and mentoring is one of them. So I leave you with this final thought of, the Arab Spring told us that one of the big reasons we're here is because there aren't enough jobs in the region. But it's not just about jobs, it's about the right jobs. It's about making sure that young people's aspirations are not wasted, that their motivations are met, and also because they are our future, so we don't want to waste any part of it. Thank you.